Narcissistic love syndrome, when the mind creates a love that doesn't exist. You deserve to be loved, but not in an illusion. Heal your loneliness before you name a relationship. Because no one can love you enough if you don't recognize your true worth. There are certain moments in life that feel like magic, a lingering glance, a smile that feels like it holds a secret, a casual act of kindness that seems to carry deeper meaning. In those moments, our minds start to weave stories. Maybe they like me. Maybe this is the beginning of something. Maybe what I've been yearning for is finally happening. The heart skips a beat. The imagination fills in the blanks. And before we realize it, a whole love story begins to play out, not in the real world, but in our minds. Have you ever caught yourself daydreaming about someone who barely knows you? Or interpreting every little interaction as a sign of affection? Or believing that behind someone's silence lies hidden emotion? If you've ever felt this way, you're not alone. This isn't just wishful thinking or romantic optimism. It may be a coping mechanism your psyche uses to soothe a deeper loneliness. We all crave connection. We all want to be chosen. But sometimes, especially when we feel unloved, unseen, or unworthy, we invent emotional connections that don't truly exist. We create narratives that make us feel desired, even if the reality is silent, distant, or indifferent. This phenomenon isn't just a romantic misstep, it's a psychological pattern. In its most intense form, it's known as erotomania, a mental condition in which a person believes that someone distant, unavailable, or of higher status is secretly in love with them. But even outside the clinical definition, many of us experience a more subtle, socially acceptable version of this syndrome. We may not be delusional in the textbook sense, but we become emotionally invested in fantasies. We imagine that our feelings are being returned, that we're part of a mutual connection when in truth, the relationship only exists in our own emotional world. This is what we refer to here as narcissistic love syndrome. It's not about narcissism in the traditional sense of grandiosity or self-obsession, but about how the self, especially the lonely, insecure, or unloved self, can create a version of love that reflects its own needs and fears more than reality. Love is real to the one who feels it, but it's also shaped by illusion, driven by emotional hunger, and divorced from actual mutual interaction. In this video, we'll explore what this syndrome really is, how to recognize it, why it happens, and most importantly, how to gently bring ourselves back to truth. Because no matter how vivid a fantasy is, it can't nourish us like a real connection can. And healing doesn't begin by chasing love in someone else's eyes. It begins by finally choosing to see ourselves ... 1. When a look, a small action, turns into a love story in our head. Have you ever felt your heart stir from just a glance? A brief look that lasted 1 second too long. A smile that seemed warmer than usual. A message that felt a little more personal, a little more frequent. You replay it. You wonder, do they like me? You start to notice everything. The way they say your name. The emojis they use when they text. How they laugh at your jokes, even the unfunny ones. At first, it's subtle. Innocent, even. But slowly, the mind begins to weave a narrative. They text me every morning. Maybe they're thinking of me the moment they wake up. They remembered something I said a week ago. That must mean I'm special to them. They look sad when I talk to someone else. Could that be jealousy? Before you know it, you're no longer living in reality. You're living in the story your heart desperately wants to believe is true. This is the birthplace of a psychological mirage. A look, a word, a gesture. These become seeds that the lonely mind waters with hope, fantasy, and longing. Suddenly, you're not just experiencing your own feelings. You start assigning feelings to the other person without ever asking them. You start building a relationship that hasn't actually been spoken into existence. It lives entirely in your imagination. And yet, it feels so real. This emotional experience, though not often discussed, is more common than we think. In fact, it has a name in psychology, erotomania. In its clinical form, it refers to a delusional belief that someone often of higher status or emotionally unavailable is secretly in love with you. But even outside of its clinical diagnosis, The mild, socially normalized version of this experience is quietly shaping many people's emotional lives. It's a fantasy dressed up as a possibility, a hope disguised as evidence. And when the illusion breaks, when we find out the person was just being polite or friendly or indifferent, the collapse can be emotionally devastating. Confusion, embarrassment, anger, even grief. Not necessarily grief for the person, but for the story that never became real, for the emotions you invested, for the hours you spent daydreaming about what could be. But perhaps the most difficult part is this: you can't really blame anyone. The other person didn't promise anything. They may not even know they were a character in your imagined narrative. The connection felt real to you because your emotions were real, but your emotions, however valid, were built on interpretations, not facts. So the question arises, was it truly love? Or was it an emotional projection? Was it a deep connection, or just your mind trying to make sense of kindness, attention, or proximity? In many cases, what we interpret as love is actually a mirror, a reflection of our unmet needs, our hunger for intimacy, our craving to feel chosen, our deep desire to believe that someone sees us and wants us without us having to ask. This emotional vacuum is not weakness, it's human. But if we don't recognize it for what it is, we start calling it romance. We start naming illusions as love. It is essential to ask yourself gently and honestly, do I love this person, or do I love the way I feel when I think they love me? That's a very different kind of connection. One is mutual. The other is emotionally manufactured. This doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're foolish. It means you're human. It means your heart is yearning to be held, and sometimes, when no one else reaches for it, your mind reaches for itself. It builds a relationship where there is none because the silence is too painful, because reality is too lonely, because fantasy offers warmth, however fleeting. But this is where we must be careful, because illusions comfort us only in the short term. In the long run, they leave us emptier than we were before. To chase a love that doesn't exist is to abandon the self that does exist, and that self deserves real love, grounded in reality, honesty, and choice. So the next time you feel that magnetic pull from a look, a word, a message, pause, breathe. Be curious but cautious. Ask for clarity, not confirmation bias. Listen to what is actually being said, not just what your heart wants to hear. Because love is not about guessing. It's not built on decoding smiles or overanalyzing texts. It's built on mutual presence, mutual respect, mutual intention. Anything else is a story, and no matter how beautiful the story is, it cannot take the place of real love. 2. What is erotomania? A psychological understanding of imagined love. Erotomania is a clinical term used in psychology to describe a type of delusional disorder in which a person genuinely believes that someone else, often someone more successful, famous, or socially distant, is secretly in love with them. This belief persists despite little or no real-world evidence, and often continues even when the person has explicitly rejected or shown no romantic interest. The person suffering from erotomania is not lying. They truly feel in the deepest sense that love exists. Their conviction is rooted in a misinterpretation of reality, driven by deep emotional needs and cognitive distortions. It's not about obsession in the usual sense. It's about misperceived emotional signals that the mind translates into a romantic narrative. But what's important and often misunderstood is that erotomania exists on a spectrum. In its most extreme clinical form, it may involve stalking, legal issues, or psychiatric intervention. But in a more subtle, everyday way, many of us may encounter milder shades of the syndrome in our lives or the lives of those around us. We might not call it erotomania. We might just call it having a crush, thinking someone likes me, or being convinced there's something there. Have you ever interpreted a small act of kindness as a sign of secret affection? Have you ever felt like someone was dropping subtle hints just for you, even when nothing concrete was said? Have you ever clung to a passing comment or a lingering glance, convinced that it meant something more? If so, you are not alone. This phenomenon is not rare. In fact, it's more common than we dare to admit, especially in the age of hypercommunication, social media, and curated interactions. But here's the key difference. When the mind begins to fill in emotional gaps with fantasy, and when those fantasies start to replace reality, we move from momentary curiosity into the realm of projection. Erotomania, even in its soft form, is not madness. It's not crazy or pathetic or paranoid, as society often labels people who misread emotional cues. It's a coping mechanism, a defense strategy of the psyche. At its core, it is a cry for love translated into story form. Think of it this way. When someone feels emotionally starved, their inner world begins to hunger for connection. The mind, desperate to find comfort, starts piecing together signs that suggest you are loved, you are special, you are wanted. And because love is such a deep, primal need, the mind would rather believe a fabricated love story than sit in the stillness of emotional absence. This is not a weakness, it's survival. Imagine a child growing up without consistent affection. As adults, we don't just carry memories, we carry emotional patterns. And when someone, even a stranger, shows kindness, our inner child wakes up, hoping, maybe this is the person who finally sees me, who finally chooses me. For people who have experienced abandonment, rejection, or neglect, this psychological tendency becomes even stronger. The mind learns to make meaning out of small things, because big love was never safe, stable, or guaranteed. Even people who seem emotionally strong, independent, or rational can fall into this trap. Because underneath all of our intelligence and logic, we are still human. We are still wired for connection, and when connection feels out of reach, fantasy becomes a substitute. Modern culture has made this even more complex. We live in a world where communication is constant, but real intimacy is rare. People send heart emojis, but don't mean love. They compliment you, but don't want anything deeper. They like your photo, reply to your stories, and maybe even flirt, but they never define anything. This creates a confusing emotional landscape where ambiguity becomes a breeding ground for projection. And because we're taught, especially through movies and books, to look for signs, we become detectives in our own lives. We zoom in on every glance, every pause, every word. We try to read between the lines. But what we don't realize is that we might be reading our own feelings into the script, not theirs. Erotomania, in its broadest sense, is a mirror. It reflects not what the other person is doing, but what we need to believe is happening. And the truth is, this imagined love feels real. The butterflies are real. The late night thoughts are real. The longing is real. The pain is real. The heartbreak when you realize it was never mutual is as real as if you had lost a true relationship. That's why it hurts so much. Because you weren't just invested in a person, you were invested in a story, a hope, a healing fantasy. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we must remove shame from the conversation. There is no shame in wanting love. There is no shame in misreading someone's actions, especially in a culture that thrives on mixed signals. But there is a quiet power in becoming aware, in noticing the gap between what is felt and what is true, in asking, is this real or is my mind creating what I wish were real? Awareness is the first doorway to healing. Because at the root of imagined love is a deeper truth. You want to be seen, chosen, and loved for who you are. And that desire, however it shows up, is not wrong. But it becomes dangerous when you start living for someone else's imagined affection instead of cultivating real connection with yourself and with people who genuinely care. You don't need to invent love to feel worthy. You are already worthy even without being the object of someone's desire. 3. Signs that you are falling into this syndrome. Not everyone who has a one-sided crush has delusional syndrome, but there are signs that you may be crossing the boundary of healthy feelings and entering the world of unreal fantasies. You often imagine emotional signals, even though the other person has not said or shown anything clearly. You interpret normal behaviors such as smiling, helping, and polite conversation as signs of love. You believe that the other person is shy to confess, afraid of being rejected, or wants to test you. You always have evidence in your head. He said that sentence that day because he loves me, or she looked at me for a long time. She must have feelings. When you're rejected or the other person denies, you still believe that they are hiding their true feelings. Love is a connection that comes from both sides. If everything is just going on in your mind, maybe it's time to take a step back and reflect. 4. Why do we easily misperceive feelings? Misperception is not uncommon, especially in a world where people are increasingly lonely, vulnerable, and yearning for connection. There are many reasons why we are prone to misperceiving that someone loves us, when in fact they do not. From within the individual's psychology, people who have been deprived of affection in the past, especially in childhood, often have a strong need for love and recognition. They are prone to attaching to any sign of care. People with low self-esteem often need external affirmation. The feeling that someone loves me becomes proof of their self-worth. When lonely, stressed, or experiencing loss, people are more likely to seek emotional support, and imagining an emotional connection is a way for the mind to protect itself from society and the surrounding environment. Movies, novels, and popular culture often romanticize vague signs, such as glances, small gestures, as proof of love. This creates a distorted pattern in emotional perception. Social media makes it easy for people to misinterpret social attention as personal feelings. Constant interaction through messages, stories, likes, comments, blurs the line between friendliness and romance. Popular cultural thinking, if someone is nice to me, there must be feelings, creates a habit of reasoning and distorted expectations. 5. Consequences if not recognized promptly. The delusional syndrome of someone else loving you is not just a harmless mistake. If not recognized and treated properly, it can lead to unfortunate consequences. Losing connection with reality. The sufferer can get lost in the stories he or she creates, unable to distinguish between real and imaginary feelings. Causing harm to oneself when realizing the truth that the other person does not have the feelings he or she thinks. The person falling into the delusion easily falls into a state of disappointment, low self-esteem, and deep suffering, affecting others. In many cases, the misconception can cause you to unintentionally bother the other person, creating a feeling of being watched, harassed, even though you do not intend to. Losing the opportunity to build a real relationship. When you focus too much on an imaginary relationship, you miss out on people who truly care about you and are ready to build a healthy connection. 6. How to heal yourself and return to reality. Healing is not about denying your feelings. It's about looking at them with awareness and honesty. Here are some steps to help you identify and heal yourself. Reflect on your feelings. Write an emotional journal every time you think someone is in love with you. Write down why you think that, what makes you believe that, and ask yourself, is there objective evidence? Or is it just one-sided reasoning? Put yourself in a more objective situation. If they behave like that with someone else, do I think they love that person too? Look at the other person's behavior with awareness. Are they proactively trying to build a connection with you? Are they saying things clearly? Or is it all coming from you? Focus on yourself and nurture your self-worth. Instead of focusing on the other person, spend time taking care of yourself. Learn something new, exercise, connect with friends and family. Build self-confidence from within. Work on personal goals. Recognize your accomplishments. Praise yourself instead of waiting for recognition from others. Accept that not everyone will love you, and that does not diminish your worth. Seek professional support. If you find yourself falling into a state of emotional misunderstanding and having trouble breaking free from obsessive thoughts, seek out a therapist. Individual therapy will help you look back at your underlying trauma, learn to love yourself properly, and rebuild your emotional boundaries. 7. Empathy, not judgment. People who fall into a state of emotional paranoia are not weak or out of control. They are simply trying to find love, but in the wrong way. If you have ever been in this situation, remember that you are not alone. Your feelings are not wrong. The important thing is to learn to recognize them, so that you do not let them control you and get hurt again. If you are the one who has been misunderstood by others, be kind but clear. Avoid flirting, being ambiguous, or giving people false hope. A gentle and honest rejection is sometimes the most humane way to love someone. 8. Conclusion. Love should not be imagined. It should be felt from both sides. True love does not need to be guessed, does not need to be inferred from ambiguous looks or words. The person who truly loves you will tell you clearly, with words, with actions, and with a consistent presence. If you have to imagine too much, fill in the gaps with hypotheses and stories in your head. Maybe it is not love. It is just an inner call, inviting you to come back to yourself, to learn to love yourself before loving anyone else. Because no one will love you enough if you yourself do not realize that you are worthy of being loved. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.